What would you do if telling the truth meant signing your own death warrant? Sarah Martinez had exactly 48 hours to decide whether she'd rather die honest or live as a coward. Inside the concrete walls of Blackwood Women's Correctional Facility, silence isn't just golden, it's survival. But some secrets refuse to stay buried, even when your life depends on it. For 7 years, Sarah Martinez had perfected the art of invisibility. At 39 years old, prisoner number 08473, she'd learned every unwritten rule of Blackwood Women's Correctional Facility. Keep your head down. Never ask questions. Never see anything you're not supposed to see. And most importantly, never, ever get involved in other people's business. Sarah was serving year 7 of a 12-year sentence for vehicular manslaughter. A moment of distraction, a fatal accident, a family destroyed. She carried that weight every single day. But she'd made peace with her punishment. She attended every therapy session. She worked in the prison library. She read philosophy books and wrote letters of apology to the victim's family, letters she never sent but needed to write anyway. Inside Blackwood, Sarah had a reputation, the quiet one. The inmate who caused no trouble, who spoke only when necessary, who existed in the margins of prison life like a ghost moving through shadows. How do you survive in a place built on violence? Simple. You become nothing. You attract no attention. You make yourself forgettable. Sarah shared cell block C, Unit 12 with a rotating cast of cellmates. They came and went, some got paroled, some got transferred, some went to solitary for infractions Sarah pretended not to notice. The current occupant was a 23-year-old woman named Jasmine Webb, 3 months into a 5-year sentence for armed robbery. Jasmine was everything Sarah wasn't. Loud, restless, angry at a world that had dealt her a terrible hand. She paced their 8x10 cell like a caged animal, punched the concrete walls when frustration overwhelmed her, and talked constantly about the injustice of her conviction. "I had a public defender who met me twice," Jasmine would rage. "Twice. And the second time, she told me to take a plea deal or face 20 years. What kind of choice is that?" Sarah would lie on her bunk, eyes closed, letting Jasmine's words wash over her like white noise. She'd learned not to engage. Engaging meant caring. Caring meant getting hurt. But on the night of October 14th, Sarah's carefully constructed invisibility shattered. It was 2:47 a.m. when the screaming started. Sarah jolted awake, her heart hammering. The sound was coming from somewhere in Block C, a horrible, gurgling scream that cut off abruptly into silence. Then voices, urgent, panicked whispers echoing through the ventilation system that connected all the cells. "Help her. She's not breathing. Someone get a guard." What do you do when you hear death happening in the dark? Do you help? Do you hide? Sarah sat up slowly, every instinct screaming at her to stay in bed, to cover her ears, to know nothing. Jasmine was awake too, pressed against the bars, trying to see down the corridor. "What's happening?" Jasmine whispered. "Don't look," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever it is, don't look." But it was too late. Through the narrow sight line between cells, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement. Cell C8, 4 doors down. 2 figures in guard uniforms dragging someone, out of the cell. The body was limp, unmoving. And then Sarah saw the face. Nina Reynolds. Prisoner 09521. A 20-year-old woman serving 18 months for drug possession. A first-time offender who'd made the mistake of testifying against a corrupt correctional officer named Lieutenant Victoria Cross. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Victoria Cross was a 15-year veteran of Blackwood, a woman who ran Block C like her personal kingdom. She controlled the contraband, the violence, the fear. She decided who got protection and who got targeted. Inmates whispered that Cross was more dangerous than any gang inside these walls because she wore a badge and could make anything look like an accident. Nina Reynolds had seen Cross selling drugs to inmates 3 months earlier. And she'd been terrified enough, or stupid enough, to report it to Internal Affairs. The investigation had gone nowhere. Cross had alibis, connections, and a union that protected her better than any armor. Nina was labeled a snitch and transferred to protective custody for exactly 5 days before being mysteriously reassigned back to Block C. Back to Cross's kingdom. Sarah had known this would happen. Everyone had known. Can you watch injustice unfold and do nothing? How do you live with yourself when you choose survival over truth? Through the bars, Sarah watched as Cross and another guard, a younger officer named Martinez, no relation, who always seemed too eager to please, checked Nina's pulse. Or rather, pretended to check. Sarah saw Cross's expression, cold and satisfied. This wasn't an emergency. This was cleanup. Medical emergency in Block C. Cross's voice crackled over the radio, perfectly calm. Inmate Reynolds, unresponsive. Possible drug overdose. Overdose. The oldest trick in the book. Sarah knew what would happen next. The official report would say Nina Reynolds died from self-administered narcotics. There would be a brief investigation that found exactly what it was looking for: a troubled young woman who couldn't handle prison life. Case closed. File sealed. No one would ask how someone in protective custody suddenly had access to drugs. No one would question the bruising around her throat. No one would care. Except Sarah had seen something else. Something that made her entire body go numb. Before Cross and Martinez dragged Nina's body away, before the scene could be contaminated with official lies, Sarah had glimpsed Nina's face in the dim emergency lighting. And she'd seen the handprint, 4 fingers pressed deep into the flesh of Nina's neck, the unmistakable sign of strangulation. This wasn't an overdose. This was murder. Sarah lay back down, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Beside her, Jasmine was shaking. "Did you see that?" Jasmine whispered. "Did you see?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "I saw nothing." "You saw nothing. We were asleep." "But that girl is dead," Sarah said. "And we can't help her now. All we can do is stay alive." How do you become complicit in murder just by staying silent? When does self-preservation become cowardice? The official announcement came during breakfast. Inmate Nina Reynolds, age 20, deceased due to suspected drug overdose. Counseling services available for affected inmates. Business as usual. The cafeteria buzzed with whispered conversations that died the moment Cross walked through. She moved through the space like a shark through water, her eyes scanning for anyone who looked too interested, too upset, too knowledgeable. Sarah ate her oatmeal mechanically, tasting nothing. Don't react. Don't show emotion. Be nobody. But Victoria Cross wasn't stupid. She knew Block C. She knew every inmate who'd been awake last night. And she was counting on one universal truth about prison: everyone was too terrified to talk. Over the next 3 days, the internal affairs investigator arrived, a tired-looking man named Detective Morrison who'd probably investigated 100 inmate deaths and found institutional failure in none of them. He interviewed inmates one by one, asking the same questions, receiving the same answers. "Did you hear anything unusual?" "No, sir." "Did you see anything suspicious?" "No, sir." "Did Nina Reynolds seem suicidal or unstable?" "Couldn't say, sir." Sarah watched this theater of justice with growing despair. Nina Reynolds's family would get a brief letter of condolence and her belongings in a cardboard box. The truth would be buried under bureaucracy and fear. And life at Blackwood would continue exactly as before. What price do we pay for our silence? What does it cost a society when justice is negotiable? But then something unexpected happened. 5 days after Nina's death, Sarah was shelving books in the prison library, her work assignment for the past 3 years, when a new inmate approached. The library was one of the few places in Blackwood where cameras had blind spots, where conversations could happen without surveillance. The woman was tall, probably mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that didn't match her orange jumpsuit. She moved with a confidence that didn't belong in prison, like someone temporarily inconvenienced rather than incarcerated. "Sarah Martinez," the woman said quietly, her back to the security camera, pretending to browse the fiction section. Sarah's hands froze on the book she was shelving. Nobody used first names in here. It was either last names or prison numbers. First names implied familiarity, connection, danger. "Do I know you?" Sarah asked carefully. "No. But I know you. I know you were awake the night Nina Reynolds died. I know your cell has a sight line to C8. And I know you're the only person in this entire facility with the courage and stupidity to possibly tell the truth." Sarah's throat went dry. "You're wrong." "Am I?" The woman pulled out a worn paperback, flipped it open. Inside, tucked between pages, was a photograph. Even upside down, Sarah recognized it immediately. Nina Reynolds, smiling, alive, with what looked like her father and younger brother. How do you put pressure on someone in prison? Show them the human cost of their silence. My name is Rebecca Garrett, the woman said softly. Federal prosecutor, currently serving 18 months for contempt of court because I refused to reveal a confidential source. Nina Reynolds was going to be my witness in a federal case against prison corruption. And now she's dead, conveniently, before she could testify. Sarah's mind raced. I can't help you. Can't or won't? Both, Sarah said firmly. You don't understand how this place works. I understand perfectly, Garrett said. Victoria Cross runs Block C. She's been trafficking drugs, selling protection, and brutalizing inmates for over a decade. Nina saw her beat a prisoner nearly to death last year. That's what she was going to testify about. And that's why she's dead. Then you already know what happened, Sarah said. You don't need me. Garrett's expression hardened. I know what happened. But knowing and proving are different things. Without a witness, Cross walks free. Without a witness, Nina died for nothing. Sarah shook her head, her hands trembling. I have 5 years left on my sentence. 5 years of keeping my head down, staying invisible, and then I'm free. I have a son I haven't seen in 7 years. He'll be 15 when I get out. If I testify against Cross, I won't survive a month in here. When does personal cost outweigh moral obligation? Is there a price too high for the truth? So you'll let a murderer walk free because you're afraid, Garrett said quietly. I'll stay alive, Sarah corrected. There's a difference. Garrett slipped the photograph back into the book and returned it to the shelf. Nina Reynolds was 20 years old. She made one brave choice in her short life. She told the truth about what she saw. And the system failed her so completely that it got her killed. If you stay silent, you're part of that system. You become complicit in her murder. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Complicit? Was she? What do you want from me? Sarah whispered. I want you to testify before the federal grand jury. I want you to describe exactly what you saw the night Nina died. I want you to put Victoria Cross behind bars where she belongs, as an inmate, not a guard. And in exchange for this suicide mission? Garrett's expression softened slightly. In exchange, I use every legal tool at my disposal to get you transferred to a federal facility under witness protection. You serve out your remaining time safely, and you get to leave here alive. Sounds perfect, Sarah thought bitterly. Except for the part where Cross finds out before the transfer goes through, and I end up as dead as Nina. I need time to think, Sarah said. You have 48 hours, Garrett replied. After that, the grand jury reconvenes and my window closes. 48 hours to decide whether you're the kind of woman who tells the truth or the kind who looks away. What kind of person are you? Would you risk everything for a stranger's justice? That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, while Jasmine snored on the bunk below. Through the bars, she could see the emergency lights casting long shadows down the corridor. From this angle, she could see the door to cell C8. Nina Reynolds' cell. Now empty. Blackwood had already assigned a new occupant. Some poor soul who didn't know she was sleeping where a young woman had been murdered. That's how fast the system moved on. Evidence erased, memory scrubbed, justice forgotten. But Sarah remembered. She closed her eyes and saw Nina's face, that brief glimpse before Cross dragged her away. A girl barely out of her teens. A girl who'd made one mistake, possession of $30 worth of marijuana, and ended up in a place that killed her for trying to do the right thing. Would staying silent make Sarah a murderer too? Or was survival simply human nature? Over the next day, Sarah noticed things she'd trained herself not to see. She noticed the way Cross controlled every aspect of Block C. The way inmates flinched when she walked past. The way younger guards deferred to her, even though she wasn't the ranking officer. The way she moved through Blackwood like she owned it, because in all the ways that mattered, she did. Sarah noticed Martinez, the younger guard who'd helped Cross that night. Martinez had only been at Blackwood for 8 months, still fresh-faced and eager. But now there was something haunted in her eyes, something that said she knew she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. How do good people become accomplices to evil? One small compromise at a time? During lunch, Sarah sat alone, pushing food around her tray. Across the cafeteria, she spotted Garrett sitting with a group of white-collar criminals, Embezzlers and tax frauds who kept to themselves and counted the days until their sentences ended. Garrett caught her eye briefly, just long enough to tap her watch. 48 hours. Time running out. That night, Jasmine finally asked the question Sarah had been dreading. You gonna testify? Sarah turned to face her young cellmate. How did you? Come on. The whole block knows. Garrett's been asking around about Nina. What if she needs a witness? And you were awake that night. We both were. Then you know why I can't, Sarah said quietly. Jasmine was silent for a moment. I got a little sister. She's 15. Smart as hell, got a scholarship to a magnet school. Only reason I did that robbery was trying to get money for her uniforms, her supplies. Stupid, I know. But I wanted her to have what I never got. What drives people to crime? Desperation? Love? The failure of systems meant to protect them? If my sister was in here, Jasmine continued, and something happened to her, and there was one person who could tell the truth about it, I'd want that person to speak up. Even if it was dangerous. Even if it cost them something. Because silence means that evil wins. Silence means that people like Cross keep doing what they do forever. Sarah felt tears burn behind her eyes. I have a son. I know, Jasmine said. You talk about him in your sleep sometimes. Miguel, right? Sarah nodded, her throat tight. You want to see Miguel again, Jasmine said. I get that. But what kind of mother does he want walking out of here? Someone who stayed safe by staying silent? Or someone who did the right thing even when it was terrifying? Can you teach courage through cowardice? What lessons do our choices send? Sarah spent her final day wrestling with the impossible choice. That morning, she was escorted to the warden's office, a summons that made her heart sink. Warden Helen Crawford was a career corrections officer, 25 years in the system, who'd seen everything and believed nothing. Ms. Martinez, she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. I'll be direct. There are rumors that Federal Prosecutor Garrett is trying to build a case against one of my officers. Rumors that she's looking for inmate witnesses. Sarah said nothing, her face carefully neutral. Crawford leaned forward, her expression hard. Let me explain how this works. Blackwood is my facility. My officers are my responsibility. And I protect what's mine. If an inmate makes unfounded accusations against my staff, that inmate tends to find their remaining sentence very difficult. Transfers get delayed. Parole hearings get complicated. Accidents happen. This was the system protecting itself. This was the machine that had killed Nina Reynolds. Are you threatening me, Warden? Sarah asked quietly. I'm educating you, Crawford replied. The federal government has no jurisdiction here unless someone invites them in. And I strongly suggest that no one does. Sarah left her office with her hands shaking and her mind clearer than it had been in days. Crawford's threat had accomplished the opposite of its intention. It had shown her exactly why Nina's death mattered. This wasn't just about one corrupt guard. This was about a system so rotten that it protected murderers and threatened anyone brave enough to speak truth. That evening, Sarah requested a meeting with the prison chaplain, a kind-faced woman named Sister Maria who'd been at Blackwood for 30 years. They met in the small chapel, a room with cracked wooden pews and a cross that had been carved by an inmate decades ago. Sister, Sarah said, how do you live with the things you know about this place? The injustice you see every day? Sister Maria smiled sadly. I pray. I offer what comfort I can. And I remember that God sees everything, even when the system looks away. That's not enough, Sarah said, frustration bleeding through. Faith doesn't stop women like Cross. No, Sister Maria agreed. But courage does. Witnesses do. People willing to risk comfort for conscience do. What if the risk is death? Then you pray you're brave enough to face it, Sister Maria said simply. Sarah, I've been here long enough to know what happened to Nina Reynolds. And I've been here long enough to know that silence has killed more people in this facility than violence ever could. How many people stay silent out of fear? How many injustices persist because good people do nothing? Sarah returned to her cell that night to find a note slipped under her door. One sentence in neat handwriting. Courage is not the absence of fear but the judgment that something else is more important than fear. Time's up. G. Below it, another photograph. Nina Reynolds' father, crying at what must have been her funeral. And beside him, a teenage boy, Nina's brother, probably, holding a framed photo of his sister. Sarah crumpled the note in her fist, tears finally spilling over. She thought about her son, Miguel. He'd been 8 years old when she went to prison. He'd be 15 when she got out, if she survived that long. What would she tell him about these 5 years? What would he think of her? Would he rather have a living coward or a dead hero for a mother? But that question was a lie, Sarah realized. Because heroes don't become heroes by dying. They become heroes by standing up, by speaking truth, by refusing to let evil win through silence. And if she stayed silent now, if she let Victoria Cross walk free, she'd be teaching Miguel the worst lesson possible, that power matters more than principle, that survival justifies any betrayal, that justice only exists when it's convenient. How do you want to be remembered? What legacy do your choices create? At 11:47 p.m., Sarah made her decision. She stood at the bars of her cell and called down the corridor, her voice steady and clear. "Guard. I need to speak with Federal Prosecutor Garrett. Now. I have testimony to give." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could feel eyes watching from every cell, inmates processing what she'd just done. In prison, nothing stays secret. By morning, everyone would know. Including Cross. Sarah had just signed her own death warrant. And she'd done it with her eyes open. Jasmine sat up on her bunk, staring at Sarah in shock. "You're crazy. You're actually doing this." "Yeah," Sarah said quietly. "I am." "Why?" Sarah thought about Nina Reynolds, 20 years old and murdered for telling the truth. She thought about her son Miguel and the mother she wanted him to be proud of. She thought about all the inmates who died in Blackwood while good people looked away. "Because someone has to," Sarah said simply. "And it might as well be me." When does one person's courage inspire everyone else? When does one voice become a movement? The next morning, Sarah was transferred to administrative segregation for her own protection, a polite way of saying solitary confinement. A 6x8 cell with a steel bunk, a toilet, and nothing else. 23 hours a day alone with your thoughts. But Sarah wasn't alone for long. On the second day, Garrett visited, accompanied by 2 FBI agents and a stenographer. They set up a portable recording device and began taking Sarah's official statement. Sarah described everything. The screams at 2:47 a.m. The glimpse of Nina's body being dragged from her cell. The handprint on Nina's throat. Cross's cold, satisfied expression. Martinez's participation. The casual way they'd called it an overdose. "Are you willing to testify before a federal grand jury?" Garrett asked. "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Are you aware that Victoria Cross will likely discover your cooperation before you can be transferred?" "Yes." "And you understand that makes you a target?" "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "But Nina Reynolds was a target just for telling the truth. The difference is, I know what's coming. I have a choice. Nina didn't." The FBI agents exchanged glances. One of them, a man named Agent Chen, leaned forward. "Ms. Martinez, I want to be very clear about the danger you're in. Victoria Cross has connections throughout the corrections system. We are fast-tracking your transfer, but there's a window of vulnerability, approximately 72 hours, where you'll still be inside Blackwood." "I understand," Sarah repeated. Garrett gathered her papers, her expression grim. "We're going to do everything possible to keep you safe. But Sarah, thank you. What you're doing takes extraordinary courage." After they left, Sarah sat alone in her segregation cell, waiting. Fear was a living thing in her chest, clawing at her ribs, whispering that she'd made a terrible mistake. But beneath the fear was something else. Something Sarah hadn't felt in 7 years. Purpose. Can fear and purpose coexist? Can you be terrified and brave at the same time? On the third day, Warden Crawford visited. She stood outside Sarah's cell, her expression unreadable. "You've made things very complicated, Ms. Martinez." "I told the truth," Sarah said. "That's not complicated." "Truth is expensive in places like this," Crawford replied. "It costs careers, reputations, sometimes lives. Then maybe places like this shouldn't exist." Crawford was quiet for a long moment. "Off the record, Ms. Martinez? Part of me respects what you're doing. But the part that's kept me alive in corrections for 25 years knows you've just painted a target on your back. I know. The FBI says they'll have you transferred within 72 hours. But a lot can happen in 72 hours. I'll do what I can to keep you safe, but my officers, not all of them share my perspective. What she meant was clear. Some guards were loyal to Cross, not to justice. And they had keys to every cell in Blackwood. That night, Sarah lay awake, listening to every sound. Footsteps in the corridor. Keys rattling. Distant voices. Each noise could be her last warning. At 3:15 a.m., the lights in segregation cut out. Total darkness. Complete silence. Sarah's heart hammered. This was it. Cross was making her move. She heard a door unlock. Then another. Footsteps approaching her cell, deliberate and slow. Sarah Martinez, a voice whispered in the darkness. Victoria Cross's voice. You made a big mistake, sweetheart. Sarah stood, pressing herself against the back wall of her cell, though there was nowhere to go. Federal agents know I'm here. If something happens to me. Another tragic accident. Cross interrupted, her voice cold and amused. Suicides in segregation aren't uncommon. Inmates under stress, facing long sentences, losing hope. Very sad. Very preventable. The cell door began to open. Sarah's mouth went dry. This was how it ended. Beaten to death in a blacked-out segregation unit, her testimony dying with her, Nina's murder remaining unsolved forever. How do you face your own death? Do you fight or accept? Do you rage or surrender? But then, something unexpected happened. New footsteps, rapid and urgent. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Step away from that cell, Lieutenant. Now. The voice belonged to Officer Martinez, the young guard who'd helped Cross drag Nina's body away. The one who'd been haunted ever since. Martinez, Cross said slowly, dangerously. You don't want to do this. Actually, Martinez said, her voice shaking but firm, I really do. I helped you kill that girl. I live with that every day. But I'm not helping you kill another one. In the flashlight beam, Sarah could see Cross's face, twisted with rage and calculation. She was weighing her options. Could she take Martinez? Could she kill both of them and make it look like something else? You're throwing away your career, Cross said quietly. Already did that, Martinez replied. The FBI knows everything. I gave them my statement this afternoon. About Nina Reynolds. About the drugs you're trafficking. About all of it. It's over, Victoria. When does an accomplice become a witness? When does guilt transform into courage? The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Then, more flashlights. More voices. The emergency power kicked on, flooding the corridor with harsh fluorescent light. FBI agents poured into the segregation unit, followed by state police, followed by Warden Crawford herself. Sarah watched through her cell bars as Victoria Cross was placed in handcuffs, read her rights, and led away. The woman who'd ruled Block C like a queen, who'd murdered and terrorized with impunity, reduced to just another criminal being processed by a system that had finally decided to notice her. Officer Martinez stood in the corridor, crying, her career and life in ruins, but her conscience finally clear. Thank you, Sarah called to her. Martinez looked up, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner. I'm sorry about Nina. You did it now, Sarah said quietly. That's what matters. Is redemption possible for everyone? Can one good choice erase a history of bad ones? 3 days later, Sarah Martinez was transferred to a federal facility in another state under the Witness Protection Program. Her testimony before the grand jury lasted 4 hours. She described everything she'd seen, everything she'd heard, everything she knew. Victoria Cross was indicted on charges of second-degree murder, drug trafficking, corruption, and a dozen other crimes. The investigation revealed a network of corrupt corrections officers spanning multiple facilities. Cross's kingdom had been larger than anyone realized. Officer Martinez pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and received a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation. She would serve 3 years in federal prison, ironically, becoming an inmate in the same system she'd sworn to serve. Nina Reynolds' father filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Blackwood Women's Correctional Facility. He won a settlement that would never bring his daughter back, but would force institutional reforms that might save other inmates' lives. And Sarah Martinez? She served out the remaining 5 years of her sentence in relative peace. The federal facility was cleaner, quieter, safer than Blackwood had ever been. She continued her therapy sessions. She read philosophy. She wrote letters to her son that she finally had the courage to send. Miguel wrote back. His first letter was short, tentative, written in the careful handwriting of a teenager who'd spent years building walls around his heart. Mom, I don't know what to say to you. I've been angry for so long. But Prosecutor Garrett called Grandma and told her what you did. She said you risked your life to do the right thing. She said you testified even though you knew it might get you killed. I still don't understand why you weren't there all these years. But I'm starting to understand who you are. And maybe that's a start. Miguel. How do you rebuild trust after years of absence? One letter at a time. One truth at a time. Over the next 5 years, Sarah and Miguel built a relationship through letters, then phone calls, then carefully supervised visits. He told her about high school, about his friends, about his dreams of becoming a teacher because he wanted to help kids like him who grew up without parents. Sarah told him about philosophy, about what she'd learned in prison, about the choice she'd made to testify and why it mattered more than her own safety. Mom, Miguel said during one visit, now 17 years old and preparing for college, do you regret it? Testifying? You could have stayed quiet and gotten out without all that danger. Sarah thought carefully. I regret a lot of things, Miguel. I regret the accident that put me here. I regret missing your childhood. I regret every choice that led me away from being your mother. But testifying? No. That's the one thing I did right in 7 years. Why? Because I wanted you to know that your mother, despite all her mistakes, was someone who told the truth when it mattered. I wanted you to know that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. What do we teach our children with our choices? What lessons survive long after we are gone? On the day of Sarah's release, 5 years later, Miguel was waiting outside the federal facility. He was 20 years old now, a college sophomore studying education, tall and strong in ways that broke Sarah's heart with pride and sorrow. He hugged her, and for the first time in 12 years, Sarah held her son. Welcome home, Mom, he whispered. Rebecca Garrett was there too, now serving as a consultant on prison reform. She'd become an unlikely advocate for inmates' rights after her own incarceration opened her eyes to systemic failures she'd never seen from the prosecutor's side. Sarah, Garrett said, embracing her. There's someone who wants to thank you. A man approached, middle-aged with graying hair and kind eyes. Nina Reynolds's father. Ms. Martinez, he said softly, taking both her hands in his. Because of you, my daughter's death wasn't meaningless. Because of you, Victoria Cross will spend the rest of her life in prison. Because of you, other fathers might not lose their children to a corrupt system. Sarah felt tears burn in her eyes. I'm sorry I couldn't save her. You did save her, he said firmly. You saved her memory. You saved her truth. And that matters more than you'll ever know. Can one person's courage change an entire system? Can one voice demand justice loudly enough to be heard? 5 years after Sarah's release, Victoria Cross died in prison. Ironically, in the very institution she'd once controlled as a guard. The official cause was listed as a heart attack. Inmates whispered it was justice finally catching up. Officer Martinez completed her sentence and emerged a changed woman. She became an advocate for corrections reform, speaking at universities and policy conferences about how power corrupts and how silence enables evil. She never tried to minimize her role in Nina's death. She carried it as a scar, visible and permanent. Blackwood Women's Correctional Facility underwent a federal investigation that revealed systematic abuse, corruption, and negligence. Warden Crawford was forced into early retirement. New leadership implemented reforms: body cameras for all guards, independent oversight committees, better mental health services for inmates, stronger whistleblower protections. One voice demanding justice became many voices. One act of courage inspired systemic change. Sarah Martinez became a peer counselor, working with recently released inmates to help them reintegrate into society. She spoke at parole hearings and sentencing proceedings, advocating for rehabilitation over punishment, for humanity over bureaucracy. She rebuilt her relationship with Miguel, who became a teacher specializing in at-risk youth. He helped other children maintain connections with incarcerated parents, believing, just as his mother had taught him, that love could survive even the darkest circumstances. On the 10th anniversary of Nina Reynolds's death, a memorial was dedicated at a community center in Philadelphia. Nina's father, brother, Sarah, Miguel, Garrett, and dozens of others gathered to remember a 20-year-old who tried to tell the truth and paid with her life. Sarah stood before the memorial, a simple plaque with Nina's photograph and a quote, "Courage is telling the truth when silence is safer." "I think about Nina every day," Sarah said to the gathered crowd. "I think about how easy it would have been to stay silent. How many people in that facility knew the truth and said nothing? I was almost one of them. Fear almost made me complicit in murder." She paused, looking at her son in the front row. "But someone taught me that silence is its own kind of violence. That looking away from injustice makes you part of the problem. And that sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply tell the truth, even when it's terrifying, even when it costs you everything." What's the measure of a life well lived? Is it the mistakes we make or what we do afterward? Miguel stood and joined his mother at the memorial. "My mom spent 12 years in prison for a terrible mistake. But she spent those years becoming someone I'm proud to call my mother. Not because she was perfect, but because when it mattered most, she chose truth over safety." He turned to face the crowd, his voice steady and strong. "Nina Reynolds was 20 years old when she was murdered for telling the truth. My mother was 39 when she risked her life for the same thing. Officer Martinez was 25 when she finally found the courage to confess. There's no age limit on doing the right thing. There's no expiration date on courage." What will you do when faced with impossible choices? Will you stay silent or speak up? As the ceremony concluded, Sarah stood with Nina's father, looking at the memorial. He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you," he said again, as he had years before, "for making sure my daughter's death meant something." "Thank you," Sarah replied, "for teaching me that some things are worth more than survival. Because at the end of the day, we are all just trying to live with ourselves." And the hardest truth Sarah learned in 12 years behind bars was this: you can be imprisoned by walls or imprisoned by silence. But only one of those prisons has a key you can turn yourself. The choice is always yours. So what's the lesson here? What does Sarah Martinez's story teach us about courage, justice, and the choices we make when nobody's watching? Maybe it's this: silence isn't neutrality. Silence is a choice, and it's often a choice that enables evil to flourish. When we look away from injustice because speaking up is inconvenient or dangerous, we become part of the problem. Sarah Martinez wasn't a hero when she entered Blackwood Women's Correctional Facility. She was a woman who'd made a terrible mistake and was paying for it. But inside those walls, she had to decide: would she be the kind of person who survives by any means? Or the kind who survives while keeping her humanity intact? Nina Reynolds died because she told the truth in a system designed to protect lies. Sarah almost let that death be meaningless. But somewhere in those 72 terrifying hours, she realized that staying silent would make her complicit in murder. That survival without dignity wasn't really survival at all. Officer Martinez learned the same lesson the hard way. She'd chosen loyalty to a corrupt colleague over loyalty to truth. And that choice haunted her until she finally found the courage to undo it, even though it cost her everything. How many people are silent right now about injustices they've witnessed? How many people look away because speaking up is too dangerous, too complicated, too costly? And what would change if just one person found the courage to say, "I saw what happened, and I'm not staying silent anymore"? The systems that fail us, criminal justice, corrections, institutional power, they survive on our silence. They count on fear being stronger than conscience. They expect that when push comes to shove, people will choose safety over truth. But every once in a while, someone proves them wrong. Someone like Sarah Martinez, who risked her life to honor a dead young woman's truth. Someone like Officer Martinez, who found redemption by destroying her own career. Someone like Nina Reynolds, who died because she refused to look away. These aren't superhuman acts. They are human acts. They are choices available to every single one of us when we are faced with impossible situations. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have testified? Would you have risked your life for a stranger's justice? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that one voice can change everything. That one person standing up can inspire dozens more. That silence is powerful, but truth is stronger. Because at the end of the day, we are not defined by the prisons we are in, whether they are made of concrete or fear or complicity. We are defined by what we do when we have the key to walk free. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply tell the truth and face whatever comes next.